I remember whenever I was about 4 or 5 years old, I lived in Douglas, Kansas. And I think we had a babysitter over there that night. Ma and Pa was gone. They were off somewhere else. And we were watching Peter Pan. It was that 1960s remake where the girl was playing Peter Pan. And I was watching on the black and white television. I think it had the round, tube on it, and I was watching it. And then it came that part to where that magic dust was thrown and they flew out the window. I thought, is that cool or what? I mean, they flew. I could do that. I knew I could. So I looked, I had pajamas on, and they were white. They had blue dots on them. I said, I think that's like that magic dust. So I crawled up on the couch. It wasn't high enough, so I crawled up on the arm. And so I started jumping off it as far as I could just to try to get some, fly. I was going to fly. I did it several times. Once or twice, I think I got a little bit of lift off, but I don't think I had enough magic dust at that point. And so anyway, time passed. I matured a little bit more, and I was about 9. And Dad bought a farm in Diamond, Missouri, and we had a big old barn. One day I climbed up into the hayloft and opened the door, and I looked down and said, man, it's a long ways down. I thought, man, I bet I could fly from here. And so, those 33 1/3, vinyl albums, that you can get. And anyway, I pulled out the albums and I kept the covers. I slipped them over my hands. And next thing I knew, I was standing out there over the loft and I jumped out. And man, I flapped as hard as I could. And I just took off. No, I didn't. It did not work out as well as you might think. And so anyway, one thing I appreciate about children is their creativity, their sense of hope, the way that they believe. Most kids think they could do just about anything. And so it's so neat to be a kid and have all those dreams and those expectations. I remember whenever I was about 18 and I was graduating from Diamond, we had 50 kids. I think we had one of the smallest classes in Diamond. 50 kids we graduated. I remember the valedictorian getting up there and making the talk and saying how we were going to go out and change the world. Truthfully, I don't think we really changed the world all that much. But I appreciate the sentiment on that the idea of hope. I think sometimes when we have nothing else in life, hope can help to carry us through, don't you? It was Viktor Frankl that talked about that some. You remember he's a psychiatrist who was in a Nazi prison camp, and he talked about how important hope was. When we had nothing else, sometimes we can make it on hope. Those of us that have been around for a few years, we know kind of how life goes. It's kind of like a pendulum, isn't it? I mean, it starts over here, and things are really good. This is when you propose to someone, they say yes, or you get that job, or you get that raise, or you have that vacation you've always wanted to have, or you're having those good times with your family you always remember. This is when you're baptized, and you have that peace that surpasses all understanding. The good stuff over there, and we like that part. We wish we could just stick there. But as life goes, the pendulum swings the other direction, doesn't it? It can swing a long way sometimes, can't it? I know it wasn't very long ago that Denny was talking about the suicide rate in our country. In the last 10 years, it has gone up something like 25%. I read a study just recently in Missouri, it said about 36%. And in Newton County and Jasper County, maybe even a little bit more than that. I read a statistic that said that the women, 1 out of 3 in their lifetimes, will probably be physically abused in some way in their lives. 1 out of 4 for the men. In an audience of this size, there are people who go through a lot of things. Just read PUSH, it comes up on your computer. You can see a lot of things that a lot of us go through at different times, can't we? There are people here who suffer through a lot of things. There's someone here who's been so lonely that you've gone to bed crying at night. There's been people here who have suffered mentally or emotionally through a lot of different things. Maybe you have depression, maybe bipolar, maybe something else going on. But you suffer. You've gone through a lot of things. There are people here who have loved ones or themselves are going through something, some kind of sickness or something, and you're wondering just what's going to happen in the future. How is it going to work out for you? There are people in here who have spiritual battles and those secret sins and things that you're trying to work through, and you're wondering, and you lose sleep wondering if you're going to go to heaven. There's probably more than one couple who woke up this morning and said, is my marriage going to last? Are we going to be together? What's going to happen in the future? And so there's so many ways that pendulum can just swing back the other way. It can swing hard. And so we wonder, how are we going to make it? What's it going to be like? How are we going to get through? We can lose that sense of happiness that we had, hopefully at least, as a child, and we fall into a sense of hopelessness. And we can feel like the door in our lives can shut. I'm calling this lesson here, the Ark of Salvation. One of the most profound stories, I think, in all the Bible is the story of Noah. And you know the story well in Genesis 6, how God had repented that he had made man. And he decided he was going to destroy the whole earth with a flood. And so except for Noah, except for his family, and they're supposed to build an ark, and they were going to be saved. And apparently, I guess, Noah must have went out and tried to preach to the people for a long time, and they really weren't hearing anything. They liked their lifestyle, and they liked the way the things were going. But then things begin to happen there. Can you imagine? We've often talked about the story of Noah, but we don't talk that much about what it would be like if you were on the other side. What would it be like when the door was closed? I can't imagine getting up one morning, hearing that sound on the roof, beating against the roof of the house, and going out and seeing the rain. If I understand the Bible correctly, I may or may not on this, but it seemed like there was a dew that came up from the ground in Genesis. It talked about the two water things. So I'm not even sure that they had rain up until this point. So water was coming down, beating down. Water was coming up, and you step outside. Maybe you had a bit of a hangover from the day before. Maybe you're sitting there thinking, oh, hey, what's going on here? And you go out and you see the water's filling up already. People are running around wondering what's going to happen and what is this? And you look and you see the door of the ark closed, and it is sealed. And already you could feel the water going up higher past your knees. Some people are going for the mountains. Some people are going on top of the roof. Some people are climbing trees. Whatever they can do, because this is a bad time. This is a terrible time. It looked like the earth is coming to an end. And you know, it was in some ways, wasn't it? And there were people trapped on the outside. I heard one study that said that maybe there were 2.5 million people on the earth at that time. I don't know, but there was a bunch. And the people were on the outside. We talk about the 8, but what about the 2.5 million? What was it like being on the outside? Maybe even treading water, beating on that ark, wondering, how can I get in? What can I do now? That sense of hopelessness, that sense of dread. Wonder what that would be like, being out there and just not knowing. You see, I think that there's some people here this morning who are on the outside of that ark. Spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, financially. I think we can find ourselves out there sometimes. And what are we going to do? How does that door open? What are we supposed to do whenever we feel like we've been shut out? And maybe there's some here that feel like maybe God isn't even close anymore. Maybe we feel like that like Jesus said on the cross, you know, my God, why have you forsaken me? Maybe it's kind of like that. I talk with a lot of people. One guy I've talked to over 200 times. He's an alcoholic. He's a drug addict. He's about everything you can imagine. And he talks to me. He says he believes in God. He says, Steve, what am I supposed to do? Just tell me what to do. He doesn't really want the church. He don't believe in that. But Steve, what am I supposed to do with my life? And he's just outside of the ark. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know where to turn. I had another lady just a couple of weeks ago say, I'm in my 80s and I'm getting very old. I'm not in very good shape and I'm scared to death I'm going to die because I don't know whether or not I'm going to go to heaven or hell. What's it like being on the outside like that? Ephesians in chapter 2, it talks about, at least in a spiritual sense, what it's like to be on the outside of the ark. And I want you to notice some of these things in red here. As for you, you were dead. Verse 2, following the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. Skip down a little bit. By nature, deserving wrath. Verse 5, we're dead in transgressions. Verse 12, separated from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of promise, without hope and without God in the world. Wow. That's a tough place to be spiritually, financially, physically, mentally. You know, we find ourselves there. That's a pretty tough spot to be in. And yet it kind of describes how some of us might feel. Now I want you to notice in verse 3, all of us lived among them at one time. Every one of us have been there. And if you've ever been baptized, you were there. That's why you were baptized, because you were going, guess what? I'm on the outside of the ark. I'm on the outside of Christ. I need to do something. And so I want you to know, no matter where you're at, if you feel like that pendulum has swung the wrong direction for you, that negative direction, I want you to know that we have all been there in some sense. I don't say that we all understand exactly where you're at or the exact circumstance, but we have been there on the outside of the ark. We know what it's like to hurt. We know what it's like to lose sleep. We know what it's like to be in circumstances that we don't want to be in. And I promise you, if you've never felt that way, if you live long enough, certainly you're going to be there. But what would it be like if we were on the inside? I can imagine those people during that time of the ark when it's raining going, man, I wish I was on the inside. Wonder what it's like in there. There's a story you might have heard about a little orphan girl. She had rags instead of clothes. She didn't have any food except what she stole. She had nothing, nothing really to live for, it seemed like. But every day she'd climb up that tree, climb up as high as she could. And she would look over the moat, over the wall, into the palace, and she'd see the king and the queen and the prince and the princess. She'd see them eating their lavish feasts. She would see them, the kids playing out in the courtyard. She'd see the clothes that they wore. And there's something about it just gave her hope, just made her happy. She had nothing else to do, so she just watched day in and day out. Nothing else to live for, nothing else to do. One day the king saw that girl out there and said, I've noticed that young girl out there on the tree so many days. Bring her here. I want to see what's going on. So it wasn't very long before she was down at the feet, bowing before the king. And he says, pray, dear, tell me, why are you always up in the tree? She said, you have to understand, I have nothing. I don't have a family, don't have a mother, father, sister, brothers. I don't have any food. I don't have an education. I don't have anything in my life. But you know, whenever I climb that tree and I look over and I see the life that you all live and how grand it is and how nice it is, I dream about what it would be like to be like you. Well, the king had compassion and said, dress this girl, clean her up. She's going to eat supper with us tonight. So that night she got to sit at the big old table and eat the feast and enjoy what it was like to be a king. Well, as this story went, she ended up being adopted by the king, and she never had to leave again, and her life became so different because she was on the inside. I'm sorry that sometimes you're on the outside. I don't want it to be that way. I'm sorry what some of you are going through. I wish it wasn't so. And whenever we're in heaven, we're not going to have to worry about that, but here we're going to have to, and so here we are. And the Bible talks about, at least in a spiritual sense, what it is like to be on the inside. Look at these words now. Ephesians 2, verse 5, made us alive. Verse 6, raised us up. Verse 7, expressed his kindness to us. Verse 16, reconciled, having access to the Father, being fellow citizens with God's people. Verse 22, in him you two are built together to become a dwelling place in which God lives by his Spirit. Spiritually speaking, this is pretty good stuff. This is what it's like when you're on the inside. That relationship that we have, reconciled to God, having peace in our life, having hope, having the knowledge that we're going to live with God forever and ever, and that no matter what happens in our life, everything's going to be okay. That's what those verses tell me. And I want to spread that back to you, that no matter where you're at, no matter what you're doing, everything could be okay. But I'm going to suggest some things in just a little bit. Some 3 things that I would like you to hang on to so that things will be okay. One of my favorite stories in the Bible, story of Jesus. He's sitting at Jacob's well, the Samaritan woman. And it's so interesting to me that she's so comfortable with God. I mean, she's just talking to him and everything's just grand, isn't it? And he says, where's your husband? Well, the one I'm not married. Well, you're right in saying that because you've been married 5 times and the one you're with now is not your husband. Wow, I perceive that you're a prophet. And she finds out he's somebody special. He said, well, if you know who I was, I give you living water. Whoops. Did Jesus make a mistake here? She'd been married 5 times, and yet Jesus promised her that she could have living water. Did he goof? This is what I think. I think that Jesus Christ is the master of second chances. I think that with Jesus Christ, I think things can be okay, and things will be okay with you. But let's see how that can be. Let's see how that can be. the door swung open for her. She was so excited. She had to go tell everyone in town. They had to come out and say, hey, I want to see this guy. You know why? Because there's not too many Jesuses hanging around. And whenever he shows up here, it's pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting. I want to look at 3 different ways in which the ark can be open to you and to me today. And you could say different ways, looking up, looking in, looking out. We'll go into more detail about it. I think the first way and the foremost way that the ark or the door has been opened is through Jesus. I think that whenever Jesus chose to come to this earth, die on the cross, and on the 3rd day he arose, when that stone was rolled away, he steps out into the sunlight, and it was then that the door was open. And the door is open for you and for me. And so it's through Jesus that we have hope that things can be okay. How do we know? Through stories like the Samaritan woman at the well, where he says, hey, guess what? Things can be better for you. John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. John 10 and verse 9, I am the door. Another version says the gate, since it's using an analogy of shepherd. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. He is the door. That's where we go through. Can you imagine what it would be like if that ark had stopped, the rain had stopped, and God had opened that door? I'll bet people would just clamor into that ark. Don't you think so? It's like, oh, I believe you now. Before, it's that silly old man who is preaching for all those times, that silly old boat out in the middle of nowhere. But it became very real soon. It's very real that we have Jesus Christ. It's very real that we have problems and that pendulum swings and that we need Jesus Christ in our lives. The first way is through the church. I believe that the ark has been opened. Specifically this morning, we're talking about Rocketine Road Church of Christ. Anyway, this church has come together. I believe that this is the ark. I believe it's the ark of Jesus Christ. Now, I want to look at this idea in 2 different ways. I want to look at this in 2 different aspects. I want to look at doctrinally, and I want to look at through relationships, okay? Let's start doctrinally. Now, what I'm about to tell you is Steve talking here, so be a Berean for me, okay? Look it up and see if what I'm saying is right. I mean, am I all wet or am I right? Check it out and see, because who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Let's see if I'm right or wrong on this deal. I believe that not every congregation, can I be so bold as to say, not every congregation is the ark. I don't believe that you can go to any church, anywhere, and as long as it got the name Jesus on it, it's an ark. I don't believe that we can be saved just anywhere that we go to as long as they say that they're Jesus Christ or they're a church. I believe that we have to follow the words of Jesus Christ. How many of here have ever heard of the Restoration Movement? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, most of you have. Well, then you know some of the characters in it. Thomas Campbell, his son Alexander Campbell, around 1800, somewhere around there. Barton W. Stone from Kentucky, Raccoon John Smith, some of those. Well, one time Thomas Campbell and Alexander Campbell got together and they got to talking. They found out they both had the same idea, that there's too many traditions in the church, too many things that was going wrong in the church, and things needed to get back to where God wanted them to be. It needed to be back like the New Testament church. And so they began to say, we'll just call ourselves believers. We'll just get back to the Bible. Thomas Campbell was the one that said, speak where the Bible speaks, be silent where it is silent. And so they got together, shook hands with Barton W. Stone in Kentucky, and their followers began to join one another in this movement. I wonder what they saw in the Bible that made them think that. Because we live in a world where churches are kind of interdenominational. Let's believe anything. Let's hold together by love and faith and belief in God. That's about all we need. We're done. We're all churches. We're all going to be saved. I wonder if the Bible really says that that's all of our doctrine. Let's look at some of these verses. Galatians 1, 8, and 9, Paul said, though we or an angel from heaven should preach any other gospel other than what we have already preached, let him be accursed. As I have said before, so say now again. Though we are an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel other than what we have already preached, let him be accursed. Notice he said it twice. I think there's emphasis on this thing. And he said, other than what we have already preached. This was the first century. Can we add to the Word of God after that and say, we can make it better? This is what I think. I think that God is so omnipotent and so omniscient. He is so powerful and He knows so much that really we can't improve on what He's done. That's just my theory. I kind of think that He knows and how to have the 66 books in the Bible that we should have. I think He can do that if He created the whole universe and everything I see. I think He can do that. I think that God can put together Scripture and things that can go through time and go through cultures and can survive. I don't think that we need people to go, God, He was pretty good up in the first few centuries, but He kind of missed it after that. So we need to we got special circumstances we need to add stuff to and do things. You see, I don't believe that was necessary. I kind of think God was smart enough to be able to handle that, don't you? That's my idea anyway. Romans 1:16, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. The power, you probably know that word is dunamos. We get the word dynamite. The power is in the Word of God that we can be saved. And it goes out to all of us in the world. But what happens when man adds his ideas? It gets watered down. The power is taken away. And so whenever we try to convert people and bring people to the Lord, there's not as much power there. I'm a little concerned about, not this congregation per se, but I'm a little concerned in the church because I'm a little bit afraid that people are so afraid that if we're not kind of interdenominational with our teaching and doctrine that maybe we won't have as many people at church. I'm a little concerned that we're going to grow up a generation of people at the age of my daughter Brianna and stuff who goes, I don't know, why don't you got a guitar in there? Or why are you baptized? Or why can't we just have a relationship with Jesus and why do we got to go to church? All these doctrinal questions. I'm concerned that maybe we're going to grow up a generation of people who really don't get it because we taught faith and love and grace so much, which we really need. We really need to be taught that and even more. But we don't teach all the doctrine. And so if we want to be the ark, I think that we need to teach the teachings of Jesus. That's my idea. Look it up, see what you think. Let's look in Revelation 22:18 and 19. Also, Deuteronomy 4:2 echoes this in the Old Testament. It says that if we add to the Word of God, God will add to us the plagues that are written in the book. If we take away, God will take away our part from the tree of life. I believe there's a message in the President that says the Word of God is pretty important, that we have in there what we're supposed to have, and we're not supposed to add or take away from it. What about Matthew 15:9, whenever Jesus was talking, and He said, but in vain do they worship me, teach them for doctrines the commandments of men. Jesus was kind of concerned, even in that day, that people are redefining the Word and adding their own traditions and watering down the Word of God. So let me say, first of all, with the Rocketine, we need to have the ark. And the way that we're going to continue to be the ark, I believe, is by teaching what Jesus wants us to teach and teaching the whole gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's how we become the ark spiritually for people. A place where people could go where the door is open, where people can have peace and rest and forgiveness of sins. But I want to look at another side of this. And this has to do with our actions, our relationship. I said before that there's a lot of us suffering in here, a lot of things going on, a lot of sadness, a lot of stress, a lot of things that's going on in the lives of different people in here. It may have to do with you going to college. It may have to do with being bullied at school. It could be just so many different things. And we need that relationship in the church. People seem to think, and how many times have you heard this? Jesus, yes, the church, no. That's kind of strange because it says Jesus will save the body. I want to be a part of the body because I want to be part of the saved. And I don't believe that we can divorce ourselves from the church and keep Jesus Christ. How can we love His head and hate His body? I don't get it. I think we gotta love the whole thing and be a part of the whole thing. So through our actions, look at these verses here. Mark 12:30 and 31, some of my favorite verses. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. Ephesians 5:28, in the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. how important it is for these relationships to be developed, and for people here who are suffering, people here who are going through life, those of us who are trying to make it, to have a fellowship of believers, people who we can go to, people we can trust. And as a congregation, if anybody ever comes to us with sins, with anything else, we need to be so accepting of who they are as a person, and loving them and taking them in and helping them through it, because we're all there. And we've all been outside of the ark, and we know what it's like. Let me say, first of all, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And let me suggest loving people who are close to you. Let's not neglect our families, our wives, our children, whether they're going to church here or they're not. Let's love the people closest to us. And let me suggest this, because I don't think it's said enough. Love yourself. Learn to love yourself. I meet people every week who don't accept themselves. They don't love themselves, and that's pretty sad. I'm not talking about that narcissistic junk, that people think is love. I'm talking about loving yourself enough to be the best person you can be, to be who God wants you to be, to learn to love and appreciate yourself, because this is the fact. As long as you're living, you're the only person who's going to be around you all of the time. I came up with that myself. So it's an important concept, though, isn't it? You got to love yourself. Take care of yourself. Be good to yourself. I'm convinced that we cannot love our wives or our husbands or people around us until we learn to love ourselves. Think about that a little bit. Galatians 6:20, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially of those who belong to the family of believers. I have been in congregations where I'd rather be out next door than in the congregation, because they're better to people out there than are their own. That's not here, but I don't want it to have it that way. Let's be good to ourselves. How important it is for us to love each other. And I just want to say again, I've said it many times, but this congregation has preached me so many sermons, the way that you live and how good you've been to me personally. And so I just want that to be spread to everybody, because I'm telling you, I answer the phone with crisis almost every day, and I'm telling you, it's full of a world of people who don't think that anybody cares about them. That's a fact. There's a fact that people grow up not having families. They don't even know what it's like to have a mom and dad who ever loved them. Never experienced the thing. Never knew what it was like. But what if they could experience here at Rocketine Road? Wouldn't that be something? People go, I want to be a part of that church. I don't know nothing about the doctor, but man, they love each other so much, I'm going there. That sort of thing. I think it's very important for us to love ourselves, love our God, love one another. Okay, let's move on to the last point. Thirdly, we can visualize the open door of the ark through you. You see, if the Lord has come to live inside of us, then it stands to reason that we are individual, kind of like little arks going all over the world. So whenever we leave this auditorium, whenever we go places, then we're like the ark with an open door today, aren't we? So whenever we go to school, we're in athletics, we're playing ping pong, we're driving, we're at work, wherever we're at, we're just kind of like little arks with the door open, just waiting. Because the Lord lives inside of us. And likely, these people will never see the church. They'll probably never even see God, but they will see you. And if the Lord is living in you, then that gives them hope. You see, what we're trying to do is bring people back into that door and let people see that the door is open while they can. During the days of Noah, that door shut, and that was it. There will be a time when the door shuts. That's it. Not only will they never hear the gospel, but you will never have an opportunity to talk to them again. I just want to encourage you, whenever you go out, to see yourself as an ark with the Lord in you and ministering to the world. I'm not going to put a guilt trip on and say, you better go and knock on doors and all that. My daughter Brianna said, I see other religions knocking the door. Why don't we ever do it? I said, I don't know, Brianne. When I preached, we did it at our church. I don't know. It's done. But that's not really what I'm talking about this morning. I just want each of us who are Christians to look for opportunities around us. Pray to God that you will see opportunity and just minister to that opportunity like Jesus Christ would do it. That's what I'm asking about. There's so many people out there who come to visit us here. People who are in this congregation. Are you looking? They're hurting. Are you seeing? Do you have eyes to see, ears to hear, and all that? Because Jesus sees it, and He's wondering if we see it, and we need to minister to them. I just want, whenever we go out into the world, to make a difference. And we cannot do that unless we have Jesus in us. And when we do, we can do it, and the world will change. I'm just going to end with a story. This story I think you may have heard before. I'll kind of step into the story just a little bit kind of bring out the point, and then the lesson's finished. I'm a doctor, I'm a surgeon, been for many years, and if I must say so myself, I'm pretty good. I've been doing it for a long time. There's a lady who came in the other day to the office, a beautiful lady, and she had clear skin, a beautiful smile, and she came in with her husband, but she had a problem with her face, and something needed to be done about that. So I ran through all the different tests, and I found out that unfortunately she had cancer. She had a tumor in the side of her face. And so we looked at it, and I saw that it was deeper than what we thought it was, and that it needed to come out to save her life. They talked it over, and they decided that they needed to make sure she had that surgery. So I was going to do it. I warned them, though. I said it could mess up your face. Things could happen. It could be some permanent damage. I hope not, but just warning you. Well, they decided to do that. Came the day of the surgery. I was in there. I operated. I did the best job I can. I promise you that. But whenever it was finished, I had to cut through the nerves. Her face was distorted. It had changed. What used to be a smile would never be a smile again. It was distorted. It was curved down. She would never look the same again. This is the way she was going to live forever. That beautiful woman had changed so much. It was so much that I was very worried about it. And I went into the room where the husband was going to be meeting her after surgery. And I just stood there because I was afraid of what might even happen there. So I stood there and I watched. And the husband came through the door. Walked up to her. She had the bandage there, and he moved it back, and he saw the distortion. He saw how I had changed her, how I didn't want to, but it had to be done. He saw how she was going to be different for the rest of her life, how she could never smile again. And at that moment, he bent down. He shaped his lips the way that hers was now shaped, and kissed her on the lips. At that moment, I could see the nervousness leaving her body. She gave him a hug, and they hugged, and they cried. And he smiled, and finally they let go, and he backed up, and he said, "Actually, I think you're kind of cute." You know, I can relate with that story because that was what God did to me. Because whenever Jesus decided to become like a man and distort himself like a man, more so than that, he became sin. He became my grotesqueness, and he distorted himself like me. And he came to me and he gave me that kiss and said, "Guess what? Things aren't right, but you know what? You're all right with me. I love you just the way that you are, and you're going to be okay." You see, that's not someone else's story. That's your story. And so whenever you go out and you're a little Noah's Ark yourself, I want you to remember that there are people out there who are distorted like you have been, and they need your help. I don't care if they've got tattoos, they're from a motorcycle gang. I don't care if their hair's short or long, or they're rich or poor or fat or skinny or smart or not so smart. It doesn't matter, because whenever we talk to people, we just talk to their hearts, and that's who we're talking to. And so it's not such a scary thing, because it's just hearts that we're talking to. It's people who are in need. And don't worry, there's plenty of people out there to talk to if we'll just look. So I just want you to know that there is hope. And if there's somebody, and I know there is, in this congregation who's suffering, that pendulum has swung the wrong direction, we've got counselors here. We've got people who have been through a lot of stuff here too. We've got a lot of ways to help you. I just wish that you would see that the door is open right now for you, and that you would come and let us minister to you and help you. This is the Ark. Spiritually, mentally, emotionally, we need the church. I'm sorry somebody started the rumor that said, Jesus yes, the church no, because it don't work that way. That's why we're living in such a lonely, isolated world, because truly we need other Christians. And maybe, just maybe, you might need us.